So good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, all the participants and listeners and viewers. This is the third event in the partnership of Mayors Association and the Novi Chas publication. And sometimes they say it's too early to talk about rebuilding the cities. First we have to win the war. But in the cities that are under attack every day from the Russian terrorists, we have to think about rebuilding already, to work out certain mechanisms and procedures so that after the victory we could quickly start rebuilding physically and actually, not just in terms of ideas and coordination and other important elements of this rebuilding. I thank all the mayors who joined in, and you know, it's so difficult for us to even imagine what kind of life you have now. I see daily these addresses from Sergey and other mayors. It seems sometimes that you don't sleep, and when during one of the events I had a message that the mayor had to leave for a while because there's on the public square there's a saying goodbye to one of the fallen heroes of the local military. And so the duties of city mayors have changed a lot, from saying goodbye and burials to coordination of humanitarian aids, support of other cities. And for each of us, you are doing real heroic deeds on a daily basis. So I would like to thank, from many people's behalf and myself, I would like to thank you and every citizen of your cities. I was in a conference in Amsterdam organized by Michael Bloomberg, your colleague, former New York mayor. So they were sharing different practices, battling the climate change, showcase some digitalization. Ukrainian mayors were joining from the bomb shelters. Andrei Sadovay from Lviv, also Mr. Fedoruk from Tretya, because there was a massive attack on October 10th. And I would like our conversation about the rebuilding, would like to start from the short overview of the situation in your cities. Of course, we read the news non-stop, but you know, cities have a very different situation. Mykolaiv was bombed today. Bucha and Slavutich are liberated, but are there risks of another attempt from the Russians to capture them? So a short overview of the situation in your cities now, and then we'll start talking about rebuilding. I'd like to have a free conversation, so if somebody wants to start, please go on and start. So if closer to the front line, or let's start from the smallest, from the smallest city. City Slavutich, 12 kilometers away from the border of Belarus. And we're still here and the Belarusians are still there. So is there a threat? In terms of common sense, there shouldn't be any another attempt to attack Ukraine from Belarus, in the western Ukraine, in the Kiev region, etc. But we see that common sense is, so to say, put it mildly, not the strongest point of our adversary. So there will not be the occupation march as it was in February 24th, because we are ready to give a fight, a serious one at this time. But still, it's an emotional threat. It's this present danger. But of course, we communicate that we have intelligence, we have communication with the military. Right now, there is no direct threat, but of course, there is a direct threat of the shelling and missile strikes. So that was the security situation. As for the humanitarian situation, we're very much dependent whether another critical infrastructure object in the region will be attacked by the adversary or not. Will there be blackouts? Will there be shutdowns? So that's the kind of the expectations we have to live on a daily basis, and the most important is to prepare for the winter period, to have reserves so that we can respond quickly to the threats and have reserved fuel, reserve capabilities, and interfere and deal with the crisis as soon as it arises. In terms of rebuilding, of course, we got more lucky than, let's say, Bucha. We had no such destruction and casualties and deaths. Fortunately, we just lost several pieces of equipment from utilities, but that's a small part compared to the heroes who died and laid their lives on the line for our liberation. Slavotic is more or less normal as it is possible in a border city. The school children go to online schooling, and we have sufficient shelters. We also have some anti-radiation shelters in our schools so that children are safe during the air raids. And we sometimes go for offline training, just like kindergartens, because, adults have to go to work and the children have to be somewhere. Slavotic lost logistics with Chernobyl because logistics was through Belarusia, and it takes 7 hours for some of our people to go to work. So that's why they go for a shift for 10 to 12 hours, and it's about 2,500 people of Slavotic residents work in Chernobyl. 2 weeks there, 2 weeks home. So we changed this kind of shifts. So the life has changed, our perception of life has changed, the priorities in life have changed. But so far, so good, especially compared to our colleagues from Kiev region and the frontline regions. We have more or less stable situation, and we can talk about rebuilding. So, Yuri, how many residents remain in the city? Because first people were leaving, then they were coming back. So what's the situation right now? We have both people who stayed abroad after they left. About 1,200 of our residents are outside of Ukraine right now. Those would be outside of Slavotic, but in Ukraine they returned, and about 1,500 of IDPs that arrived to Slavotic from Energodar, as a city with the nuclear power station. We have close ties with the municipalities. We try and help them as much as we can. We created an IDP hub based in some of the hospitals. We have free spaces there to place people more or less comfortable. Although there is no rental residential housing available. So we're trying to accommodate them as we can. We cannot say that there is a significant decrease of the number of residents. We basically more or less the same amount as we had before the large-scale war. Alexander, what about you? I've seen your Telegram channel today, and I saw this picture where they write to you, give up to us, we still will prevail, and you tell them to go and follow the Russian warship. So what's with the Mykolaiv city and the daily attacks and daily missile strikes? I am a bit concerned. I understand that everybody is concerned with their own problems, but when some big city, Ukraine, is attacked with missiles or several missiles and 6 people die, the whole world writes on tabloids that there was a terrible missile strike. At the same time, Mykolaiv just today was attacked with C-300, with 4 missiles, C-300. whereas the number of missiles daily is on average 8. 38 per day, 38 missiles per day was a record-breaking. It was Alexei Vadatursky died at that day, one of our agriculture moguls. And we have daily shellings and missile strikes. We only have 40 days where we had no missiles. Just yesterday evening, 19 Shahed drones attacked, 14 were hit, 5 unfortunately reached their targets, whichever they were. So, and that's what we have on a daily basis. It's obvious that until Kherson is liberated, it will not change, because a missile, it takes 1 minute for a missile to fly from Kherson to Mykolaiv. And it's like, if you hear an air raid, be sure there will be no explosions. If you hear explosions, rest assured soon there will be an air raid. Even if you see them visually, the missiles taking off, and it takes forever for the air raid to turn on compared to how quickly it takes for the missile to strike. So we've been shelled all the time, and we see that the Russian troops are aggregating and pumping up their military in Belarus. So you got to be prepared. Unfortunately, Russia can afford a lot of cannon fodder. We don't know their motivation, of course. We don't know what they want to achieve with this war, other than just destruction. Sometimes journalists ask me, are you satisfied with the slow encroaching counteroffensive in Kherson direction? And I say, we are ready to tolerate and to keep up with that, because we want to save the lives of our military. Our partners can give us cannons, Bayraktar, HIMARS, but nobody will give us people. Nobody will go and fight the war for us. Even with the Russians saying that it's NATO soldiers fighting against them, that's ridiculous. And at the same time, very sad, because we are losing the most valuable, our valuable people, highly educated, skilled. Whereas what they put against us is the lowlives and the scum. Although we lose daily very patriotic, smart people, bright individuals. So it's, often you often hear from friends and colleagues and comrades, we're so tired. But if you don't know, if you think how bad you feel, think about those who are much worse. In Kherson, Mykolaiv, there are more sand soils, but in Mykolaiv it is more loam. So when it rains, in the trenches, you could be like a knee deep in water because of the loamy soil. So if you think you feel so bad, let's see the trenches where in the cold, wet night, bone-piercing cold, a lot of water, and what do they feel? Starting from the start of the war and until today, we of course help the military, starting from building fortifications with our equipment, with our utilities, and of course capturing the different or removing different military equipment from the battlefield. Our army has become much stronger over this time of war, and our residents have faith that Kherson will soon be liberated. In Mykolaiv, there are about out of 500,000, about half of residents stay. All the necessary utilities are provided, although the water is not potable, it's not drinkable. That's the only inferior service that we're providing, water supply. And when we heard recently that we should save electricity, don't turn on the lights, and the companies refrain from working, we've been for 8 months like that. We are masking the light. Just 2 weeks ago, we started turning on the light in the night so that it's safer for people to come back from work. Big companies don't work. Only small and micro businesses work. So I'm not going to shut off elevators for the saving, because people, there are senile people, there are elderly who are not so mobile and they don't want to leave the city. So that's what the situation that we have. As a city in a war zone, but everybody is pretty positive. We have faith in Ukrainian victory. So 220,000 residents, that is quite a lot compared to the situation and the inferior services that you have to provide for some reason, for objective reasons. But of course, we wish the quickest victory, and so that we avoid more losses of the best of the best. Anatolій Федорук, city of Bucha. Bucha has received quite an attention from international community, and you had prime ministers and presidents coming to you, and international delegations come to you. You showed them the situation so that they understand better who is the adversary we are facing. What's the situation in the city? We've seen some pictures where some of the buildings have been restored and to provide food. Some people come back and do repairs. So how good is the city now adaptable for life? Greetings, dear colleagues. I have to state that after what we've lived through over this time, we've learned serious lessons, both in terms of preparing the city and the community for the new heating seasons and the challenges that may arise, so that the enemy doesn't sleep. They want to try and attack Kyiv region again, but they will fail miserably, of course. So out of 53,000 of residents right now, about 40,000. So people are coming back, the life comes back to Bucha. We restored critical infrastructure. We repaired those social objects that had to be rebuilt, prepared for the new academic year. I mean, schools and kindergartens. I understand that most of the parents decided to let their children study online. The companies that were economically active are basically conserved or suspended their activity, because in the crisis situation that we have in the energy sphere, it's hard to have a full-fledged economic activity. So basically, as of now, we have situation under control with the stages of ruination and casualties that we lived through. It's difficult atmosphere, of course, in the city, but we have faith in our victory. We have faith in the armed forces, and we, of course, will be victorious. As for the delegations that were coming to visit, we understand why, the first liberated city with the biggest number of casualties at that point, just about 500 people tortured and killed. But if we look at Chernihiv region, Kharkiv, Sumy, Mykolaiv, Russians still leave a trace everywhere they are. So Bucha has shown what they are, what Russians are as a people or creatures. Thank you. Sergey, you have in your city educational facilities ruined and destroyed. There are attacks and logistical problems. So what's the situation right now in Zhytomyr city? Compared to Mykolaiv, we have a resort. Everything's so far so good. Of course, at the start of the war, a lot of people lost their houses, and it took a while till the state, the government, and international funds are refurbishing or compensating those people for the destroyed residential housing. It's much more simple, but the enemy continues to look at Zhytomyr. 2 weeks ago there was a missile strike against the energy infrastructure of the city. There were several wounded, and then we started saving. We started saving street lighting. We cut down on consumption of electricity by some 15%. And of course we limited the electrical transport traffic because we also feed energy for the Kiev grid. So last Tuesday we had another missile strike. Zhytomyr was on a blackout, no electricity. Hospitals and medical facilities started using autonomous fuel, autonomous electricity. And there are 16 new babies born without electricity, so life goes on. Response teams have restored electricity supply, but it's still not enough for big companies, for the transport. So that's the situation at the moment. And we are getting ready to give a warm welcome, quote-unquote, to Belarusian and Russian occupants if they dare. I'm a former military. I saw the intelligence data in February, those units who were standing on the border. I understand that so much of them using these kind of roads in Ukraine, it was absurd. But still they did it. A lot of things have changed. Of course, they have learned the lessons, and we have learned the lessons. We've built reinforced concrete fortifications, and our military keep the situation under control. But Russia have announced mobilizations, conscription. It can be 300,000, it can be 1 million. And they don't care about their people. They use them as meat and cannon fodder. So, even if it's 500,000 from Belarus, they won't be able to keep staying in the field for months. They will try and enter. They don't have so much workable equipment. The roads are mined, but still, this whole mass is cannon fodder. They will just try and enter through police or forests and try to create tension to get the Ukrainian military stretch their front because they're losing territories that they captured. So we have to get ready for the worst scenario. In Ukraine, if we looked at some scenarios, there was always the worst scenario happening. So you got to get ready for that. And I want to say thanks and great greetings to Mr. Bloomberg. There's never a former mayor. Some 4 years ago, I was in San Francisco, organized by Mr. Bloomberg, and we signed an agreement. 100% transition to renewables. That was the first city in Ukraine signed this kind of commitment, and we're moving on that direction. So we're running 2 other renewable boilers, another heat station. So out of the 97 million cubic meters of gas that we used in 2015, this year it's only 35 million cubic meters. So cut in 2. The next year, we only keep 5 to 7% of the balance sheet in terms of gas commodity from the previous year. But it's not only about saving gas, it's about resilience of the system. We were getting ready for this complicated forthcoming winter in the military situation, but the new challenges, we see that the enemy can effectively destroy the energy system of Ukraine. So it's difficult. And in a city where 220,000 people remain, I cannot install a firewood oven in every apartment and deliver water to every apartment. So we are buying several big generators, 150 to 300 kilowatts, at least to have 1 hour of water supply per day, so that the limited water supply, people can get some water and water treatment, and the district boilers can feed hot water at least a limited time for the whole city, at least 5 hours per day. We will be able to feed the hot energy. So we are building the resilient system so that in case even a full blackout, we can stay for a week or 2 weeks and even more in winter. So these new challenges that the local self-governance faces, it's still far cry from thinking about rebuilding, but still we have to think about rebuilding right now. But right now the plan is to survive the winter. That's first. And with Olександр Сєнкевич, we have our own intelligence data about the end of war. So we gotta wait till next April. Right. So let's hope for that. Let's hope for April and less losses and damage in Ukraine. But Sergey, I want to clarify something, because you always look like a person who have all the solutions in your pocket. You have contacts in place, everything's in place. So you say you're procuring generators. The money is too tight to mention for the cities, of course. But what's the budget that you're using to buy these generators? Is somebody helping you? Do the residents help you? Because it's important. It should be. It can be a positive practice for other cities. Back in summer, we started talking about it, and we were saying that the government has to build a reserve on the governmental level and distribute this reserve throughout the regions, so that in this kind of situation we can respond quickly. But we now have to do it ourselves. And of course there are different foundations that are helping, the UNICEF, the UN. We're helped with the part of the generations, but it's mostly small generators, 20, 40 kilowatts. So we were planning to install those generators on the district heating points. We've created several of them, based in schools and kindergartens that have their own boilers, alternative fuel boilers, districts that are using alternative sources. But the big capacity generators, of course, nobody would even suspect that the whole of the energy system can be in blackout in winter. So we're preparing for that, and that's why we have to opt out, and that's only local city budget that goes for these big generators. About 120 million hryvnias is that we spent for helping our military units. I'm not even talking about social support and other. It's just purely for the military support, 120 million. So it's all local budget money. Right. Thank you. Your functions as mayors have changed a lot. And as the Mayor's Summit was said, it's important to have a strategic view of your city's development. Of course, we now have a lot of running issues and urgent issues, but my question is, to what extent the war forced you to rethink and reevaluate city management as such? What was the weak spot? What was the strong point? We've seen some pictures where after the missile attacks in Dnipro and Kiev, there was this huge holes from the bombs, and then the next day they were no longer there. How effective the utility services can work. And you know, before that, before the war, we were always very critical. So about repairs and state of roads. So what has changed in your view, in the management of the city, the governance? Alexander? You know what my colleagues were telling me about big cities and the holes from the bomb? Again, if it happens once a month, and if it's tens of companies that deliver these road repair services, you have all the equipment, you have the asphalt, it can be done in an hour. And you know, in China, it takes a day to build a bridge. In Mykolaiv, unfortunately, we don't even have an asphalt producing factory. The closest one is about 100 kilometers away. So we don't have the necessary materials for road, for tarmac. We don't have functional railroads. So from the start of the war, I got everybody at the city council, and on February 26th, we stopped working in the city council building. It's shut down ever since. There's nobody there. Of course, there's a guard always in there checking the premises, but the building otherwise is empty. And all my deputies, all the utilities are using electronic walkie-talkie. And it's about 40 people in the channel, the deputies, the mayor, deputy mayor, heads of the utilities, heads of the districts. So all the information and the communication goes through this walkie-talkie, through the portable radio. We have technology to pinpoint where the missile struck. Through the we get to know what urgent help is needed, where, etc. So this experience, of course, we will use this experience in the future. I don't know how we work without it in the past. So we are provided with walkie-talkies by different organizations. There are walkie-talkies that cannot be used in a military situation. They're too simple, but still people are, and we sell them to our doctors in hospitals. So they are also using these walkie-talkies between the floors, etc. So communication of a different type, more operational, is great. And of course that the war has taught us to work faster. And of course some things now take faster time. For instance, cutting the grass. Some of the residents are criticizing me, why do we cutting the grass and spending money for that? I don't think the war is a reason to let your city look like an overgrown village. We have to be state-of-the-art cities, doing the upkeep and trimming everything even during the war. Of course, we don't have enough transportation, we don't have enough equipment in Mykolaiv, but again, we receive a lot of assistance from abroad, from our partners, and they help us at least with the used equipment, but still it's equipment that we can use to keep our city alive. So in Mykolaiv, from April 12th, the normal water supply has been no longer there. It's because the Russians shot our water pipelines. We draw water from Dnipro and from occupied Kherson. So after, on April 12th, they exploded 2 pipes. You know, it's a huge pipes, like a meter and a half in diameter. So they blew them up because they said Ukrainian special forces can use these pipes to travel to Kherson within the pipe. So it's like Hyperloop of Elon Musk. They suspected that it's already there in the pipe, so they blew it up. 100,000 cubic meters of water was pumped on a daily basis from Dnipro River, and for a month we were without water. At the same time, we built a new pipeline, and in a month we will be drawing water on Southern Bog River. But it's a regulated river, and it has very slow flow, and the salty seawater comes in, and it's still, desalination is not available. So if you taste our water, it's a little bit salty like seawater, because it's mixed with seawater. For 1 month we lived without water supply. The biggest problem right now is salt destroys our pipelines. There's so many leaks, 20 times more leaks now. So the number of amount of water that leaks through these holes, about 50%. We're 50% we're losing. We're pumping water and we're losing half of it because of the leakage, because of the saltiness. And we had to supply cold water to the drinkable water to the cities. We're not talking about hot water even. So feeling that this can happen, we talked and we started drilling wells in all the social objects like hospitals. And when, after a month we started, they ruined our pumps. So we started using water while transporting it with cars. You know, it's 260 thousand square kilometers, or 260 square kilometers is the area of the city. So we started transporting water with cars. Now we have another problem. Temperatures going down. And when the temperature below zero, the water will freeze in those cars. And people will freeze. So our objective right now to install about 130 local water supply points. Sергій Сухомлin has given us purification stations of reverse osmosis from 1 to 3 cubic meters per hour. We don't need big ones because we understand they don't help us a lot. They're too big, so we're looking for smaller ones. And also we, as I said, create the heating hubs in schools and kindergartens, administrative buildings, where people can come in and get some free drinkable water. So I have maybe a different scope of problems than other cities in terms of heating, because you cannot feed salty water in the heating system. But we still manage that, and our systems are 90% pumped with water. So we found another interesting thing. When people have heard that we are purifying water, some of them started collecting the water from the pumps, from the pipes in the houses. But we explained to them this water should not be used for food because it's technical water. So these kind of problems, heating, water, and windows. Half of the city left, but in there are abandoned houses, and there's nobody to fix the windows. So we're using our teams from Ivano-Frankivsk, from Odessa and Zhytomyr, also Rivne, also from Lutsk. And those teams, they are repairing these waters with foam, because the heating, we are still going to heat the buildings where there's not even much people, and we want to ask people to pay, because the heating will be used for their houses, which prevents their houses from fungal damage. And I had a message in my messenger that in Kiev pumps are shutting down and elevators are shutting down. But of course, that's very small compared to Mykolaiv. We started this conversation before we were on air. We exchanged some news, and Yuri said that something is on the way to Mykolaiv. But I wanted to rephrase that. You know, before the war, between the communities and cities, there has very seldom were intermunicipal cooperation between the cities. Because joining efforts grants new opportunities, saves the budget, especially for smaller communities that didn't have funding. Is anything going to change ever since? And because local self-governance showed that in this difficult time, the solidarity is there. We know that you communicate with each other, you're helping each other. Yuri, probably it's a question to you, since you mentioned helping Mykolaiv. Not will change, it has already changed. The horizontal connections between the cities from the very first days of large-scale warfare have basically worked out 100%. Based on our experience, having these 12 kilometers of border with Belarus, it's understandable that in some days we were deep in the enemy lines without any medication supply, fuel supply, and a lot of the city mayors were asking, how can we help you? What's the logistic available? What are the ways like guerrilla warfare? Sергій Sухomlin is with us today. He's an ambassador of the city. Unfortunately, we only meet online nowadays because we want to thank them for helping us a lot. So these horizontal changes are working today, and if we see that somebody needs help, we respond. We say, what can we do? How can we be of help to other cities? So I agree with Zhytomyr. We understand that compared to Mykolaiv, everything's all right. So far, so good. Not so many missiles, at least very often, not very often, and we feel much safer. If we can't help, of course we are helping, and with self-mobile brigades to repair, to help, or sharing whatever we can. Although, of course, everybody is challenged on the eve of the new heating season. I'm confident that these relations between the mayors, between municipalities, are going to stay. And are going to stay and get stronger. And in the time of rebuilding and renewal that we want so much to reach, April is April, okay, I agree. We will make it to April. Of course, the most important is to save our lives, to save the Ukrainian military, Ukrainian citizens. But of course, everything has changed. Earlier, we were mostly talking about interaction and cooperation of municipalities with European and American partners. Nowadays, though, it's much more, it's as important. The cooperation between municipalities is as important as cooperating with our Western colleagues and great helpers. So local self-governance in Ukraine, which is a product of decentralization, which is administrative territorial reform that has happened and is happening, it's one of the key elements that enabled Ukraine's survival. The municipalities, mayors, communities, they were the first to put up a fight together with the armed forces. So it has changed a lot. Yuri, what is this municipality cooperation? Is it formal or is it informal? It is at the moment informal, and it's the strength of our society. That's the kind of people we are. We finally found a system which is organic for us. We moved away from the Soviet system which we hated, transforming through market economy to honest, genuine Ukrainian, soul, heart and soul. That's our organic way of working. the way decentralization works. Organic relations, that's something organic for us. The Soviet vertical of power is inorganic for us. We hated it. That's why they hate us so much. And decentralization was an organic thing for us. And you keep talking, communicating to people as equals. You don't speak down or up. And it's so great when you can help each other without fighting for status. It's awesome. We feel as part of the real fabric of life, of society. Somebody's getting help because of you. You're getting help because of somebody. So this is an organic thing for us Ukrainians. We don't, you know, jostle for space between mayors. We're very friendly. We are constructive. You know, back in summer we were asked, what does it mean, association of Ukrainian cities? Basically, we're almost all are members of that association. So my response for our foreign partners was simple. It's the organization that can crash any draft law in the parliament that will attempt to undermine self-governance and decentralization. Because that's the kind of attacks that we had. You know, there were a lot of attempts to undermine decentralization. And there were people asking, so how do we help? How do you help each other? What do we do now? Who can help the IDPs? Where can we help? So this is organic thing for Ukraine. This is great, and it's great that we talk about rebuilding the cities and our society. Thank you for mentioning decentralization, which basically has given the local self-governance more resources, bigger mandates. But now that businesses suffer so much, you know, the revenues are much slower in the local budgets, and that can lead to part of the mandates that the local self-governance had will be revoked again to put it on the top. So what should be changed? How the revenues should remain locally so that the cities can impact positively their development. Sergey, it's a question to you. Yeah, we talked about the association and the Congress of Local Self-Governance. Still, we succeed in establishing the dialogue with the government, and our voice is heard. And basically, over the last year, during the war, it's more and more prominent. So they hear our voice, because a year ago it was different. So they started. They wanted to rearrange the revision of a decree that refurbished the budgets. This year, they removed the the revenue tax for the military. So the discussions are going, so we keep the reverse subsidies, about 380 million hryvnias for the next year. This huge money that we need. That would be of great help and support for Zhytomyr. So anyway, communication is happening, and I think the war is changing attitude to local self-governance. And the central government also sees that the cities have taken a lot of functions that earlier were only, directed from the central level. But we locally, we can have much more effective and quicker decisions. As we said, horizontal connection emerges from the news even that you see on the news. Kupiansk was liberated, and when you see what kind of conditions people remained there, there was no authorities there at the time of liberation. So some of us in Zhytomyr went over there after a couple of days after liberation, and the same morning there was a missile strike on hospitals. one doctor died, two nurses died, so we brought them generator, food, medication, a lot of other things. So now we're preparing the utility equipment, the waste management vehicles, etc., to Kupiansk. Why do we have such relations? Because we feel in one team, which is Ukraine. We genuinely are working towards a shared goal or victory. We don't care how small or big the percentage of your input is. We see we keep our eyes on the prize. So your question, how local self-governance changed and what allows us to be quicker, more effective, I would say the law has changed, luckily, more mandates, more powers, but personal example is much more important. The trust of your community is much more important. In the first days of war in Zhytomyr, I fired 2 heads of utilities who left the city. And you know, in each system, when it really works, there are always connections through which the signal either doesn't pass or has a great lag and delay. So the start of the warfare with the missile strikes, they've basically filtered that unproductive part of our people. Only those remained who are motivated. And then the system started working much better, much more effective. I had a question. So you say that some people left the city, but we rarely say what kind of people left, what professions have left. So often we are faced with people leaving, but we need those people, utility services and other important people. But you can always train new people. So how much of a challenge is that for you? Because teachers and doctors sometimes leave for other countries, and it's a great challenge for a city. Out of utility services, almost nobody left. Only 2 directors that I fired. It was a little bit of an overshot from my part, but it was a normal response to set an example for everybody else who decided to stay here and help defending our city. So from the executive branch, about a half, and they were women, and it's okay, and it's normal. We allowed them to leave because they had children, but a lot of strong women remained and have been working 24/7, just like men. So it was like 40 people doing all the work that previously was done by a much bigger team. And we haven't given up an inch of quality. Sometimes, you know, we have to manage the situation. There are a lot of criminal cases that will be investigated later. For instance, some of the water basin was damaged, some of the voluntary decisions that people made, but back then only several people knew about it. And some of these things were necessary to stop the onslaught on Kiev, but it is a criminal offense. As the head of our civil administration, only amnesty saves us. So we had to do rash things to keep the occupants from reaching Kiev. Anatoly, so Alexander, during the Lviv forum, Olександр Сєнкевич said that rebuilding is not just to put the chairs back after the earthquake. That's true. It's not as easy. And on the same Amsterdam conference, another colleague of yours from Vilnius, who is a great patriot of Ukraine and a great helper of Ukraine, he said that we all want to, see Ukraine built back better. So the process has started already. How do you see it? We had some previous discussions with urban philosophers, and it's not only about buildings. It's not only about schools, kindergartens and schools. It's about a updated agreement in society, between society and the authorities. So what does it mean for you, build back better, and especially in your example in Bucha? In Bucha, the situation is difficult in this regard, because after what we lived through, after the news was spread about the victims and casualties that fell from the hands of Russians, it was important to find it in ourselves to not only get back to the city, but to do what's needed for the future survival. To show that Bucha is a city of comfort, the way we wanted, the way we were building it for years now. Yeah, we have survived a terrible thing, but we gotta do all we can so that the citizens of our community keep living in our city and keep up the spirit. Because the information cycle brings us back to what we survived. The journalists keep asking questions, and people don't want to think about it anymore. They want to relive that trauma, that terrible stuff anymore. So there are a lot of psychologists working in our community to channel this whole trauma safely, so that we make our community more healthier. So that's why it's important to start thinking about rebuilding back better everywhere in our country. So the experience that Ukrainian cities have gained is super important and exciting. That's the way we said about horizontal cooperation, intermunicipal. It's there. It does indeed give us the opportunity to re-evaluate ourselves, where we are, where we're moving. Of course, bigger cities. You mentioned the possibility to be in Amsterdam as an online intervention with colleagues in the world. They have different problems. They have different challenges. But of course, we have learned a lot from them. And you mentioned the Vilnius mayor, or the Polish cities mayors, or even German. Their experience is very close to us. So we had development strategy way back when, and we keep moving along that strategy, but the war has put different challenges. It's so nice to hear optimism among our mayors, my great colleagues and friends from Mykolaiv, Slavutic. I think the most important now is to prepare our cities to the forthcoming challenges, the heating season, and defense. Because, we're sitting here, but the information is that there's still a threat from the north. Now, coming back to the previous question, I want to stress that 64% of the revenue tax which remains locally. Just answering to your question, does the central government retake their powers back? No, quite on the contrary. Alongside with traditional functions, we take even more mandates and power, which is great. But alongside, there are also threats, because intermunicipal cooperation that we mentioned, they are trying now to over-regulate in the government, to create hindrances for funds, etc. So we have to voice that. We have to be in the dialogue with the government, with the state authority that would enable the municipalities to cooperate, to help each other. Because I cannot even imagine the first days after liberation, what would happen if there wasn't assistance from Zhytomyr, from Volyn, from Podillia, from the south of our country, because it was everybody's call from their heart. There was no radio, but every mayor, when they appointed responsible people for the community, they tried to assist in the ways that was most needed at that time. So that means solidarity among our municipalities. We feel it back inside the country and in the European community as general. We work with different municipalities in the world, and they understand what's important in this kind of situation, and we understand from their decisions that they were taking in the system while they helped reorganize life in our cities. I know for Bucha it's a difficult question, but when we talk about rebuilding something, it's a common practice for countries and cities to engage the community in the rebuilding as an effort. I agree that there are a lot of psychologists working, people who have lived through trauma, who lost their relatives, who were witnesses of terrible things. So are you thinking about some mechanisms, how to engage people effectively, how to keep them motivated? Because there's always a risk of, military romanticism is still there. We're donating a lot of money, but, they come to mayors. Please help us here, build us here. And so how do you engage people, and how do you make that as effective as possible? So Anatoly, first you. If we compare how civil society is organized in the cities of our neighbor countries, my subjective opinion is that we have a lot to share with our partner municipalities from the experiences that we've had. Let's say the condominium movement, the co-owners of multi-storied houses, they are the helpers that help us resolve the challenges that we face. Civil society movements, organizations, especially now, it's so exciting to see how new organizations are being born, or the old organizations are being reborn to try and help fundraisers, and they attract resources as a magnet to rebuild a certain structure, a certain facility. So this grassroots movement has gained a whole new level in terms of cooperating with international partners, etc. And that shapes and transforms the attitude of each individual citizen. I liked how the mayor of Mykolaiv urged and rallied the residents to pay for utilities, and was very convincing in that. And we have to keep communicating with the citizens to explain to them so that we keep trust, because trust is our vital source. And we're open all the time. We are accessible and available for communication. A lot of international experts from organizations that come over here, they are surprised to see, the positives are surprised to see how the local self-governance is open and available and effective. I would tell you honestly that in Poland, let's say, the local self-governance, when they survey their residents, they account for the needs of Ukrainians, because they are aware that a huge number of people may stay in Poland. In Danzig, for instance, the population is raised by 20%. So engagement, but engagement of very effective mechanisms, because often local mayors speak through Telegram and Facebook, whereas there have to be mechanisms where experts are engaged in these communications. Yeah, I can add a little bit. Of course, engagement of the communities is very important. Because the community spirit is life for the sake of victory and returning to a greater life without war. So our residents keep talking with American partners, and we give our citizens the specific missions. Some fundraise in Trafalgar Square in London to restore Lyceum 25. Some in the US fundraised for another cause in Zhytomyr. So, and we, as a result, we had a great program for prosthetics for our military. But you are right in saying that the community itself must be engaged in decision making. So, using this example of restoring Lyceum number 25, we created 2 work groups and a supervisory board. The supervisory board contained teachers, schoolmasters, and parents. And we are discussing together with them, as well as with prominent people engaged, like ex-minister Anna Novosad, she's the head of the Junior Academy of Sciences. So we're talking about plans and concept of rebuilding Lyceum 25, which was completely destroyed. But before we rebuild anything, we have to be aware and answer the question to ourselves, what the city will be after the victory? What do we want it to be? I still have, concern that a lot of people will stay abroad. Are we going to be competitive in education? Because children in Zhytomyr were selecting between modernized schools and not modernized schools. Better teachers, not so good. But now the competition is different. We're competing with Italian schools, with Polish, American, and Dutch schools. And at the moment, we have nothing to showcase. So we have to understand what kind of businesses will stay and keep working in our cities. I respect Chernihiv city, but I don't think that in the nearest 5 years the big international businesses will invest in Sumy or Chernihiv, remembering the dangers of war. So what kind of schools will there be? What kind of heating systems will there be? For whom are we building all this? That's what we have to think about. So when we're designing concepts, and as an example of Lyceum 25, we want to build the Lyceum again and make it competitive. But not in 2 years, but in 10 years, let's say. So the supervisory board that we have right now, there's one scientist from NASA in that supervisory board. So rebuilding is not just building the concrete house, walls, and ceiling and rebuild the Soviet school again. No, it's a different concept. Thanks to the Finnish fund, we have a work group that is going to be drafting a curriculum for this lyceum, so that the children have a separate program in the lyceum. We want to make it open. Not only from Zhytomyr students can get into this lyceum, but other cities as well. So to find money, we have to showcase something that we have a clear understanding what we want and what are the objectives. Then the money will come. Like for instance, day before yesterday we had a Skype meeting regarding the city design and planning. We understand that this should be a completely different concept. And we are now in negotiation with Venice Architecture University, and they have huge experience in renovation and post-war recovery. They work in Syria, they work in Ukraine, and in Kiev region. We want them to help us with the project. It's not going to be one establishment. It's going to be a whole block in the center of the city. There will also be a scientific museum that's going to be part of the block, plus the library. So basically we want to build in the center of the city an educational block, educational quarter. So first we have to answer the question, why are we doing that? For whom are we building that? What do we want to get? Right, Sergey, thank you for touching upon this topic. I want to readdress a question to you that I was asked during the conference in Warsaw. There's a big interest from architects, from city space designers towards Ukraine. There was a moment where everybody wants to do something good, some kindergarten, a school, but it's not just a facility. It's some kind of architectural object, which may not be architecturally part of the city, conceptually. And I think right now our identity has been shaping as a crystal. The idea of being Ukrainian has been crystallized much more clearer. And back in Amsterdam, Mayor of Vilnius gave me a brochure. His wife is an architect. They also have these interesting designs for schools, etc. So how do we avoid risk where we're given something as a present, as a gift, but something which is not organic in our city? So how do you work with that? We give them full freedom because they're basically giving us a present, or do we engage our Ukrainian experts to participate? So how do we avoid where small one spot facilities will be presented by someone, but they will be not designed as part of the city? I also read about the School of Architecture in Venice. So how to do it properly? Why we opted for Venice University of Architecture and Design? Because we were offered a turnkey project by a British company in London. We politely declined. And we also had a proposition from Portugal government who wanted to fund the full works on the Lyceum 25. But the Venice University of Architecture, they are stressing that there should be a community, local community engaged in design. And local materials should be in the priority. Local workforce, everything the best available in the region. So they worked that out. And of course, collaboration with the local self-governance, that is a must. So they have a more profound, more fundamental approach to solving these challenges. That's why we opted to work with them, and we want to thank them so much. Because again, it's not just about rebuilding 15,000 square meters. No, we want to build something that makes a difference, that is in the spirit of a victory of Ukraine, a victory of the new mentality, of humane spirit, which is symbolic, but it also gives new opportunities for education for our children. Another thing, competition. It can take longer time, but I think you know, why not in the competition? You know, if Calatrava suggested, or some architectural bureau, because that's more simple to fundraise, because everybody wants to invest in signature objects that can be showcased later as something that they had input in. So we're trying to select the best, and honestly, to make fundraising also simpler. Well, you know, I don't see any risk here regarding the question as you put it. Everything that's going to be designed or built in our cities is going to be built within the legal framework. And the civil society is keeping a sharp eye on that, especially what pertains to architectural work, just as in the executive service and architecture services. Like, for example, in the city, because of the need that we had before the war, that we worked with Lithuanian partners, because it's sort of a cooperation between Lithuania and Latvia, we are implementing a project, a school, in a kindergarten school. This is the new type of thinking. New ideas from architects from Vilnius, but at the same time, we are adapting everything to our legal framework in terms of energy efficiency, in terms of accessibility, and the environment itself, the learning environment. You mentioned the citizens of Georgia who are in Ukraine and back in Georgia have initiated to build in Bucha a kindergarten, a modern, state-of-the-art building. But what's important, the author of this initiative as a concept in the work group of architects, together with our experts, with the civil society, who were directly tying the territory to the city, they only added small amendments, small adjustments regarding the description of how this facility is going to be used. So each initiative serves a certain purpose. Of course, different companies or communities want to make a mark, but also make a mark with something that doesn't lose meaning after it's completed. So it's more about things we built before. Some of the things that were built in historical parts of the city were not organic, but still, but now we have much better, much bigger experience. So the European cities and municipalities that have more experience, they have a lot to share how to communicate, how to discuss with the community facilities and objects that are to be designed. So it's not our attitude that, well, if it's for free, we don't care how. No way. This is a discussion of quick decisions, quick solutions versus long-term solutions. And it's not only about school or lyceum for 2 years or 10 years into the future. Because if we dare to hope, we hope that in some 5 to 10 years Ukraine will be a strong, state of well-being. Yuri, a question about money. Just recently I had an interview with one of the co-founders of Nova Ukraine Foundation. They help a lot of Ukrainian cities. And from the start of the war, they managed to engage above $30 million. So when I asked them, they work all over the US, and they opened an office in Ukraine just recently. And they communicate to the foreigners so that the foreigners give them money. And they needed to come up with some indicators, such as transparency, accountability. They can always show where the money went to, how difficult or easy for Ukrainian cities it is now to find funds, and what are the best mechanisms for fundraising for rebuilding in Ukraine. Is it city and city, or through funds, through a central system? We know that even in the United 24 as a system, there's a separate column, rebuilding, but how then the priorities are set, which city gets how much money. What's the opinion that you have on that? The money is always important in a civilization based on economy. We can't work without the money. I liked the example of rebuilding not being just the furniture and walls after an earthquake. It's not about cosmetics. It's the new public agreement. It's the new paradigm. Like on the conference, what's been discussed? Climate change, the Green Deal, it's also about us. That's what we also have to think about. We have to understand that we are already candidates for EU membership. Then, of course, we will be. Why else would we claim the candidacy? That means that the European Green Deal will be part of our deal. And our rebuilding and renewal has to be within that concept. That's one part. Although our European partners can also learn a lot from us regarding energy resilience. We have experience firsthand. We can show how Slavutic city, without electricity, had water and heating without generators even. So small know-hows here and there are something that we can share. But when we talk about rebuilding, that means also the waste management. There's a new law, and it has to be fulfilled and implemented as part of the European Green Deal. It's also part of the rebuilding. It's also part of the new paradigm in the society. And it's about accessibility, which was one of the leading trends in Slavutic. The accessibility is so important right now for everybody. Sometimes it creates conditions controversial, where people on scooters online traveling on high speeds on the tarmac. But still, we have to understand that our heroes, our men and women that are serving in the military, they will be back to life with different needs. Some of them, and many of them, unfortunately, will require accessibility because of their special needs and disabilities. So what about the projects that we see? It should be a collaboration of Ukrainian architects, architectural bureau, the modern ones that have demonstrated already, great examples why Vilnius is very active in working with Ukraine. Maybe it's through the volunteer movement of architects. We have a great new shared project with Vilnius and our Ukrainian Bureau X-City Lab that built an exhibition park in Kiev. So those agencies wanted to change Ukraine even before the war. Now we're saying, is it okay for our cities, this huge expansion of European architecture to Ukrainian cities? I agree with Anatoly here. It's a bigger question, what do we do with what we have? Is what we've built so far ourselves is part of the organic quality of life? And, you know, I just have to look out the window and tell you what I see out there. And I see Baltic quarters who were built by Baltic architects. I see architects from Caucasian countries. So 8 countries built the city. So the concept of Slavutish city can serve as an example for Ukraine, where the whole world, the whole Europe is rebuilding Ukraine, but in a very organic way. You know, my question was a little different. I will go back to the question the way it was. I'm talking about foreign experience in rebuilding Ukraine. It's great to be able to learn from the best, but it's more about engaging effectively people. Basically, you've answered that the international cooperation should engage Ukrainians, because it's not only about rebuilding 1 or 2 or 3 facilities. It's about the city as a general. The new senses, the new conveniences. And I have one question from Bucha residents about accessibility. So I'm not saying foreign experience is something alien. It's about proper application. So tell me now about money. How to secure funds for all these things. Just one thing. How not to make mistakes. It's important to have a high-quality contractor. We are contractors. Municipalities are contractors. Our design architecture bureaus are contractors. We have to learn. Don't be shy to learn. And ask our foreign partners for trainings. Get experience, get training. The mayors as well. We have to learn. Everybody has to learn. The new concept is always learning. So that's why we need to get knowledge and skills, and in that way make less mistakes. So money. The money is available, and it's relatively easy to fundraise them. It's important to have high-quality proposal. Most of the institutions that are ready to cooperate nowadays with Ukraine, with the municipalities, they are asking us, give us a great proposal. The first stage of collaboration between Ukrainian and European architects, not only architects, urban designers, that's the most important, high quality value proposition. And that's the most important aspect. It has to be a super open and transparent procedure, clear and understandable to everyone, to the donors and to the communities. I read in the comments to our announcements where people said, no, you should not give money to mayors or no power to them. It's got to be a different way. Let's build a guillotine in the middle of a city where corruption will be punished with capital punishment. You know, it's understandable that people are emotional, because for many years we were hearing, oh, China has capital punishment for corruption. Well, as we see, it was capital punishment for political opponents. Corruption, although, is huge there, but it's institutional corruption. So we're talking about transparency everywhere, clear, understandable mechanisms, and then the money will come to the end consumer. Of course, the money will be used as to build concepts, spaces. So in order to secure funds, you have to have a great value proposition. What's the money for? Because nowadays, our challenges, of course, are more tactical rather than strategic. We have to survive the winter, have the fuel, have the generators, spare parts, water purification, and we are engaging funds for that. We're helping our men and women on the front line, helping them with the warm clothing, etc. Whereas in the larger concept of rebuilding, we have to provide a value proposition. And that's what the money is available for. Anybody has comments? What's the most effective mechanism to secure funds for rebuilding? Or you have some experience already? You have some interesting experiences. I wanted to add regarding the first question now, because I had to drop out for a while. In Ukraine, we have a lot of specialists in football, boxing, and road building. But they left Ukraine. Only military experts remain in Ukraine. We are all experts in how to organize the offensive, the counteroffensive. You know, Ukrainians have a great humor. My old aunt, who sadly died at the start of this year, she was a prominent artist in Ukraine. So they've organized a public competition to reconstruct the Soborna Square in Nikolaev. So they built a European square with fountains, the way like in many best world cities. And then the people said, what kind of nonsense is that? You didn't ask any experts. So when we did a questionnaire, and we asked, how do they see this public space? And she asked me, why do you ask people how should the square look like? I say, because it's the world trend. You should engage people in decision making. And she says, you know, if Ludovic XIV asked the people how Versailles should look like, it would have looked like a 4-story wooden outhouse. You have to ask people who understand it, who are educated in city planning, who have the know and are knowledgeable in the trends of modern architecture and city building. Now we are participating in UNICEF program in creating a city general plan. In my social networks, I asked Mykolaiv residents to fill out a questionnaire. How do they see Mykolaiv after war? So based on that, we will design the general plan, we will secure funds and engage the experts. We believe Mykolaiv, just as many other cities, have to change after war. It is a great tragedy, and it's an opportunity to rebuild our country. I spoke on the same forum and said that Ukraine used to be a strange, inorganic organ in the body of Soviet Union. After the body of Soviet Union deteriorated and disbanded, and Ukraine, it took such a long time for Ukraine to understand that we are a body. We can't all be only tourist attraction. We can't only be a shipbuilding city. It should be comprehensive. So, yeah, maybe we don't have to rebuild 3 schools. We should build 1, but state-of-the-art, modern, and organized school buses. Maybe we should think not only about availability and accessibility on roads and pedestrian zones, but to reevaluate all the road network at all and go away from the Soviet concepts. I listened to what Sergey said from Zhytomyr. It's a huge problem nowadays that specialists who remain in Ukraine, who will want to return to Ukraine, they have to answer the question themselves. Why do I return to Ukraine? If we hire specialists for the minimal wage, if we keep talking that mayors should all be poor and ugly. I don't think we won't move anywhere. Let's look at Singapore, where top-level officials are also officials from big companies, and they receive salaries. The experts should be engaged in local self-governance, not just say you are nobody hired by people and you're just managers. And finally, about money. We do have experience. I've talked to a lot of donors so far, and also talked to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Denmark, as well as Minister of Development of Territories. And I've said everywhere, we don't need money so much, because money will come and the scandals begin. Just use tenders and take projects. Just use tenders on international platforms, select a winner, fund the winner, select some companies, Danish, etc., that will secure those funds, and cooperate with our people. Because you can't bring everybody to Ukraine instantly. That's why we have to start working with them now and teach students in the technical college and schools and train the new generation of people who rebuild the country. The money, well, if it comes to budget, it will disappear in the budget, just as any assistance that comes through the budget. And the centralized government will just decide, oh, who needs more, Mykolaiv or Kherson? Who needs more? And it's like who has better connections, vertical connections to, you know, corridors of power. So I think these projects should happen directly. Because if it's going to be a centralized, new, great construction 2.0, it will lead to a great disbalance where some people have everything, others don't have anything. You have to work, you need a NEFCO, international funds. And also, the most important, you have to engage in business investments locally. Because people are coming back, they have to have jobs. Whereas the foreign investors have to understand that they're not just creating one more beggar country. It's going to be a partner. It's not going to be just a nice-looking country who keeps begging for money. It's going to be a productive country that will be a partner who will be well off and making money on its own, but also part of the global community. I can add where the money can be found. You know, there's a lot of money available in the world. You can use our connections with brotherly cities. They are actively finding and securing European funds, private funds, and they're actively helping us. But also in Europe, there are a lot of organizations and funds who are ready to fund. But first of all, first thing they're trying to establish is understanding why is it needed and who is it for. Second thing, transparency for them is of utmost importance. Zhytomyr is easier in this regard. We have all the European anti-corruption initiatives in place. Mykolaiv too is part of the program, so it's a little easier. It's the argument for many European funds. Availability of the local team that is capable of implementing, because the funding itself or negotiation itself, for them, it's not the most important, because they're all people who are heading and the funds or funding the funds. They also need to be transparent for all that money before their country, before their constituents. So a successful implementation of projects strictly in the deadline, very transparent, that's what's important for them. If you have all these parts in place, the money is not a problem. Yeah, I can illustrate this by example of a Polish fund that just gave to the Mykolaiv water purification facilities when they lost somewhere. There was no feedback. Until I got to know them personally, I was sent a photograph. That's why it's important to have high-quality coordination, transparency, and also the teamwork that Sergei mentioned. And I think that's exactly one of the challenges, so that Ukraine doesn't become another beggar country, but becomes a partner country. So that's catch-22 in some way. We have to show zero tolerance to corruption, transparent rules, and teamwork, and international level of schools, so that investments would come and foreigners would have a great life here. But on the other half, we need investments to begin with to reach all that. So it's a difficult process, tricky one. I just want to cover one more question. In fact, I have many more questions, but we are running out of time. Yuri has mentioned a little bit about it. We constantly say that, I think, Ukrainian cities were not represented on the world level earlier. Now, sadly and tragically, many of Ukrainian cities have become famous in the world, and the mayors of these cities talk with presidents, prime ministers, etc. In Amsterdam, they were talking about climate change, how climate change manager that was in the city, and then there's a heating manager. So they are trying to find solutions against anomalous heat. Some are talking about battling floods, decarbonization. So, but we have to prepare for the possible danger of another onslaught from the north. But if we want to keep playing the role in the world arena, somebody has to deal with that. Somebody has to think about energy efficiency, Green Deal, safety and security, so that at least somebody invests in Ukraine. So how do we provide that? Because the scope of tasks that you have to tackle is colossal. Maybe you need some additional teamwork here, or additional skills that you are lacking. The partnership with foreign cities, how to manage these processes so that our cities remain in the spotlight, but not in a tragic sense. Free mic. Okay, let me start. Basically, you've listed all the necessary ingredients for a city to be well aware of the, and to stay in the spotlight. We need skills, we need knowledge, we need to tackle the brain drain, because we keep searching for candidates for the vacancies, and we hire younger generation that don't have the skills or experience, but they gain that. And so knowledge and skills is important. We also have relations with our partner European cities who can become guides for us towards European trends of battling climate change and urban development. So this cooperation should be there, and experts' engagement should be there. And then it makes our life a little easier, because there are too many challenges. Of course, you got to work just twice as much, because we have to satisfy the current needs, and they're significant, and we have to think about the future, but to think about the strategy, development, and European integration, real, full-fledged, on the level of municipalities, regions, and the whole country. So my personal opinion is that this knowledge, this support of the expert, and opportunity for our personnel to learn, and the partners' support in Europe from our brother cities, from different European organizations and associations, it would be great, so that we don't lose the momentum, we don't lose the strategy, and we maintain tactical tasks, the defense, the heating season, to provide the minimal necessities, necessary challenges, administrative community utilities. Only this kind of collaboration together can give us a chance to achieve success. Because we should not lose time so that we have to catch up later. Because the future is not devoid of challenges, and you got to learn to try to accomplish twice as much working with everybody, civil society, non-governmental organizations, and having expert support and skills and knowledge so that we are in the loop of the latest trends. It says here that Slavutic is the city of new ideas. So we hope not just ideas, but implemented ideas. When I greet my friends with birthdays, of course, the main holiday that we're all expecting is our victory. I wish us all dream, and these new dreams are embodied and become reality as great, bright, creative, positive dreams. That's our philosophy here in Slavutic. Okay, so additions, and then I have a short question to Anatoly. We understand why the world has focused attention on Ukraine, because of the war that Ukraine is fending off on behalf of the world. And, you know, Ukraine has been ravaged by catastrophes, revolutions, and war. We need to transform so that after the victory we don't lose again to the adversary who just wants destruction. So being stronger, having much more investments, I would add that everywhere I'm speaking online, I say that when you look at on TV some bad news, you can switch the channel. The same thing, you know, when you see people get killed in Mykolaiv and Kharkiv, when you see people tortured like in Bucha, Irpin, and others, of course, for a while, you are terrorized, but then it's kind of hygiene. I don't want to dwell on the stress. I want to keep up the positive spirit. But that desensitizes you at the same time. Remember how we saw Syrian war from the video, because Russians were razing cities, dozens of and hundreds of civilians and children murdered. And then gradually the world was desensitized. I'm concerned that the same things happened with Ukrainian. We have to speak more about our heroes, simple people. What philosophy, what is the life strength, what is the mindset that Ukrainians use to survive? And it's, you know, because it's, Ukrainians are facing huge odds, but we will be victorious. And it's not that much that Ukraine is at war with Russia, because Russia is just a marker, it's just a name for the whole mindset. The world that don't want Western civilization. They just want to live in constant banditry, lawlessness, where the few have everything and the rest they don't have anything. Western civilization is about being productive, but there are still people who don't want to be productive. They want to do the killing and murder. And it's no longer a war, it's genocide. There is no demilitarization, there's no denazification, there's genocide. Just like the Nazis wanted to eradicate the entire peoples, that's the same thing. They want to eradicate the Ukrainian nation, and that will make them happy for some reason. When the bridge was exploded in Crimea, a lot of people were happy, and I said, you know, I think that's the job of the Russians themselves, so that they have, you know, an explanation why they do what they do next. And they started to destroy our civilian infrastructure. They said that they evacuated 50,000 people from Kherson. That's lies. They're using these small boats through Dnipro. The 5,000 tops. You got to think, what's going to happen next? Do they want to explode the dam and kill more people? Or they want to strike with the nukes that they've been salivating about? And you got to talk about this to our European partners, because regardless of the odds that we're facing, we survive, we are getting victorious, and we're very motivated to live. So that is our fuel. Absolutely. I would just add a little bit. When we talk with foreign investors or an American fund that started construction of the new center, about 5 million euro of money and investment. It's a children's rehabilitation center. They need to have some hope in tomorrow of Zhytomyr and Ukraine in general. And when during the war we have Italian factory being built, or as we said, we launched our solid waste processing factory. We are almost there. We don't want to advertise so that Russians don't know so much about it. Then we are in negotiation with English Bureau to help us build a modern art museum. For them, it was a shock. We are struck by missiles when we talk about building art museum. Damien Hirst is destroying his art, and we asked him, give us at least one picture. Or with the mayor of Wrocław, who helped us a lot with refugees and assistance. And so I tell him, you have a great stadium project. And he says, why do you need a stadium while the war is going on? We're thinking about architectural designs, just in advance. So for them it's a sort of a shock, but it's also an understanding we're not planning on giving up or succumbing to the monster. Just one remark. I had an impression that our European partners, they're no longer saying that the war is somewhere there in Ukraine. They are perceiving that as a war on the east of Europe. And that gives us a little more confidence that we are consolidated. We share that awareness that Ukraine is facing the enemy on behalf of the entire European family and the Western civilization. Yeah, we are standing against the civilization of trash where people are not valued at all, where there's just hedonistic elite. And before the war, there were 2.7 million of people with disabilities. They were very uncomfortable in Ukrainian cities, traumatized, and as a mother of two children, I feel their pain. And after each strike, unfortunately, we will have a lot of people with disabilities, with hearing, eyesight impairment, and with limbs missing. But we have to make our cities accessible. We have to remember that, because every Ukrainian citizen who suffered in the war have to be comfortable in our cities. That's the message we have to keep in mind. It's difficult it's difficult to live with disability as such, but when you have spaces that are not accessible, it's even less pleasant. So Slavutic, before the war, was planning to become the first fully accessible city. I would just remind you that this is a very important aspect. I want to thank you all for this discussion. Traditionally, we don't cover all the topics during these 2 hours. You are great discussion partners. I want to wish us all to soon start working in a different mode, where you no longer think about danger, but travel and conferences, discuss the designs and city spaces and investments, and remember the terrible times of war, and wish you that the coordination of humanitarian aid and war for resources that is no longer part of our life. Thank you for being committed to our country, and the victory will be ours. Thank you for everything you're doing.